Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're going to read the last chapter from Brilliant as the Sun, a retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 3, Part 2, Two Avatars, Chapter 33, Devahuti attains perfection. After Kapila leaves her, Devahuti practices severe penance and devotional service, finally attaining the eternal spiritual world. Verse 1, meditating on Kapila's words, Devahuti's heart became peaceful. What was the value in endlessly lamenting her husband's departure? They were two spirit souls who had come together by Krishna's grace. Their union had served its purpose. She resolved to keep her focus on Kapila's loving service, which was the only path to eternal happiness. Offering obeisance, she praised Kapila, thanking him for revealing Sankhya philosophy, which had the power to destroy all grief. Verses 2 to 3, My Lord, your body is completely spiritual and is the source of countless universes. The great creator Brahma was born on the lotus emanating from your navel as you lie on the Garbhodak ocean, but even he had to undergo extended meditation in order to see you. By your will alone you accomplish everything. You expand as the Guna avatars to bring about the creation, maintenance and destruction of the universe. You are the Lord of all living beings, for whose sake you have created this cosmos. You have nothing to do, for although you are one, your diverse energies act inconceivably. Verse 4, Since you are the Supreme Person, it is not surprising that your instructions have delivered me from ignorance. What is surprising is that you took birth from my womb, although I am just an ordinary woman. How is this possible, considering that the entire cosmic manifestation lies within your abdomen? Tears streamed from her eyes as she gazed at her son's face in wonderment. She shook her head. What is not possible for you at the time of universal dissolution? You sometimes appear as a small baby lying on a banyan leaf, playfully sucking on your toe while floating on the waters of devastation. Therefore, it is not so astonishing that you have appeared as my son. Verse 5 and 6, My dear Lord, you have come in this form to diminish the sin and consequent suffering of fallen souls by teaching knowledge of liberation and devotion of yourself. Since the sinful conditioned souls depend on your direction to deliver them, you also incarnate in various other forms, such as Varaha, to say nothing of the spiritual benefit bestowed on those like me who directly see you face to face, even those who simply chant your holy name, hear about you, offer you obeisance, and remember you, can immediately become qualified to perform Vedic rituals, even if they were born in a family of dog-eaters. Verse 7, Oh, how glorious are those who chant your holy name. Even by once chanting without offense, one becomes worthy of worship and is considered as good as the cultured Aryans. In previous lives, they have already performed all kinds of austerity, sacrifice, study of the Vedas, pilgrimage, and baths in the sacred rivers. So the word Aryan is applicable to persons who know the value of life and have a civilization based on spiritual realization. This is from Bhagavad Gita, as it is, chapter 2, verse 2, in the purport by Srila Prabhupada. So this was from the appendix, the meaning of the word Aryan. Verse 8, Devahuti hesitated. She hesitated, feeling inadequate, concluded her prayer. Although you have become, I'll meditate on you, for only by your mercy can one gain liberation from the clutches of material nature. Verse 9, Kapila rose and lovingly touched his mother's feet. Then he gravely replied, verses 10 to 11. My dear mother, the path of self realization I have explained is very easy. You can follow it without difficulty and you will soon be liberated even within this life. True transcendentalists traverse the path I have given. I have taught to you. Be assured that if you follow it perfectly, you shall be freed from fearful material contamination and attain my eternal abode. Persons who do not know this method of devotional service certainly cannot get out of the cycle of birth and death. Verse 12. Kapila then walked around his mother 3 times as a sign of his respect and humbly asked her permission to leave home. He wanted to set the right example for other transcendentalists who aspired for spiritual realization. Her tears flowing freely, Devahuti touched his bowed head in blessing. He had accomplished his mission at home. Without any further ado, Kapila left. Beads of sweat ran down the faces of the two friends absorbed in Kapila's pastimes. Neither of them had noticed how the day had passed. It was now late afternoon and they had been speaking since dawn. Thin wisps of smoke rose from the smouldering fire, which had all but gone out. Maitreya stood up and stretched out his lean frame. My dear Vidur, you must be hungry and tired. Shall we take a short break? When they were refreshed and rested, they resumed their conversation. Vidur said, Pray tell me what happened to Devahuti after Kapila left. The Vedas say that a woman should be protected at all stages of her life, first by her father, then by her husband, and finally her son. Why then Kapila leave her, or did she follow him? Verse 13 and 14, Maitreya replied, while delivering spiritual knowledge to his mother, Kapila fully discharged his duty to protect her. She took those teachings to heart and remained at home in her ashram, practicing bhakti yoga as she had learned from her son. Seated in her flower-bedecked palace, which was like the flower crown of the Saraswati, she became absorbed in samadhi, bathing 3 times daily. She reduced her eating and sleeping and wore old garments. In course of time, her curling black hair turned grey. Verses 15 to 18. By virtue of Prajapati Kardam's mystic powers gained by his austerities and yoga practice, he had created an opulent palace so splendid it was envied even by the celestials who traverse outer space in their airplanes. Luxuriant beds were spread with milk-white sheets and pillows. The chairs and benches were carved from ivory and covered by lace cloth with golden filigree. The couches were made of gold and had silken cushions. The walls were constructed of gleaming marble decked with valuable gems that illuminated the palace. All the maidservants were adorned with costly jewels. There were delightful gardens with fragrant flowers and many beautiful tall trees laden with fruit. Birds warbled in their branches and bees hummed around the blossoms, making the whole atmosphere extremely charming. Verses 19 and 20. When Devahuti entered the garden to bathe in a lotus-filled pond, the Gandharv girls would sing about Kardam's glorious household life. Their songs reminded Devahuti how her great husband had protected her throughout her life. Thus her heart was always free of anxiety. Yet despite her incomparable opulence, coveted even by the heavenly damsels, Devahuti became detached from her comfortable situation, preferring to live simply. Although she did not feel any inconvenience in foregoing material amenities, she was distressed by separation from her son. Vidur was surprised. Did she not miss her husband? Verse 21. Maitreya said, when her husband left, her grief was assuaged by Kapila. When he also left, she felt desolate, lamenting like a cow bereft of its calf. She would cry piteously to her friends and visiting relatives, Please bring my son home so that I may live. Without him, I shall surely die. Verses 22 and 23. Indeed, it was because of such intense meditation upon Lord Kapila that she lost all attachment to her lavish home. However, because such thoughts gave her pain, she felt she had to change her meditation. Recalling Kapila's instructions that she had so eagerly and attentively heard, she began to concentrate on the eternally smiling Vishnu. Verses 24 and 25. Daily she would speak about Vishnu with her companions, chant his holy names, worship his deity form, and offer him prayers. Soon her mind became filled with his loving remembrance. Highly abstemious, she ate and slept only to stay alive. In time, she became Brahman realized, fixed in knowledge of her spiritual nature as Krishna's eternal part and parcel, increasingly absorbed in meditating upon Vishnu. Her heart was purified of all material contamination. Vidur asked, after achieving self-realization, why did she continue to meditate? Verse 26. Maitreya said, since she was always discussing Vishnu's form, qualities, pastimes, and she naturally became absorbed in meditating on his personal feature. Knowledge of his impersonal, all-pervasive Brahman aspect is automatically revealed to one engaged in such devotional service. Devahuti became free from material identification and its concomitant sufferings, because she perceived how everything is in the material world is Krishna's energy. She thus attained transcendental bliss. Freed from the bodily illusion of bodily identification, she became fixed in samadhi. Indeed, she was no longer conscious of her material body, just as upon awakening from dream, one forgets his dream body. Vidur asked, how did she maintain herself? Verse 28. She was tended by the celestial damsels. Kardam had provided her. Her body remained healthy as she had no anxiety. Vidur looked puzzled. It is said that one in the renounced order of life should not accept personal service from anyone. So why did Devahuti accept service of her Gandharv maidservants? Maitreya nodded, acknowledging Vidur's insightful question. This may appear to be against spiritual principles, but just as fire is still beautiful even when covered by smoke, she remained pure. Although surrounded by luxury. Vidur was still doubtful. How could she remain pure while transgressing such an important principle? Verses 29 and 30. Devahuti made no arrangement for her own bodily care. By Krishna's will, the celestial maidens cared for her. She was simply absorbed in samadhi, so much so that she was unaware of her physical appearance, not even noticing if her hair was loose or her garments disarrayed. By applying Kapila's teaching, she soon became liberated from material bondage and then saw the supersoul within her heart. Finally, she entered the spiritual planet known as Kapila Vaikuntha, where she eternally enjoys the company of her transcendental Son. Verse 31. The location where she achieved perfection, my dear Vidur, has become a sacred place of pilgrimage. It is known all over the three worlds as Siddhipad. Vidur's bodily hair stood erect. With Devahuti's success filled him with a sublime hope. By following her path, perhaps he could too one day be reunited with his beloved Krishna. He wondered if a body was entombed at Siddhipad. If so, he could go there and pray for her blessings. Verse 32. Maitreya said, there is no tomb for her, my dear Vidur. Her material body melted into water, which is now the most sacred of all rivers. Anyone who enters those waters becomes spiritually perfect, and therefore those desiring perfection bathe there. Vidur decided to locate Siddhipad and bathe in all the rivers in that area. He asked Maitreya what Kapil had done after departing. Verse 33 and 35. My dear Vidur, the great sage Kapila, the personality of Godhead, after taking his mother's permission to leave his father's hermitage, traveled to the northeast. As he passed through the Himalayas, he was praised by Charans and Gandharvas, as well as celestial sages and damsels, who offered him prayers. He then followed the Ganges river to her delta, famous as Ganga Sagar. There the ocean deity worshipped him and requested him to stay. Even now Kapila remains there in trance to deliver conditioned souls throughout the three worlds, and all great teachers of Sankhya philosophy worship him. Maitreya felt silent, absorbed in his own thoughts. How unfortunate that of late an impostor Kapila preached an atheistic version of Sankhya philosophy. Shaking his head sadly at the thought of people being misled, he sighed, "My dear son, since you have inquired from me, I have answered. O sinless one, descriptions of Lord Kapila and his mother are the purest of all discourses, are the purest of all discourses, and such narrations are most confidential, and anyone who hears or reads them becomes a devotee of Krishna, who rides upon Garuda. Therefore, he enters Krishna's abode to engage in his transcendental loving service." Tears trickled from the corners of Parikshit's eyes. Maitreya and Vidur's conversation had enthralled him, although he had not taken even a drop of water since insulting sage Shamik the previous morning. He barely noticed his bodily discomfort. The king was determined to continue in the same way until his death in 6 days. It would be suitable penance for his offense to Shamik. Parikshit glanced at the assembled sages. Beads of perspiration shone on their foreheads. He could see that they too were mesmerized by Shukadev's narration and undeterred by the relentless heat of the midday sun. His gaze settled on a group who had espoused atheistic Sankhya philosophy before Shukadev's arrival. Surely they could not still adhere to their foolish misconceptions. He looked back at Shukadev, who was smiling at them. Understanding his mind, Parikshit bowed his head, his palms folded. He was deeply grateful for Shukadev's teachings. He humbly asked if there was more to Maitreya and Vidur's conversation. Shukadev nodded. Maitreya continued to speak about Swayambhuva Manu's descendants. "Listen, my dear king, as I relate the rest of his account." A great roar filled the shady copse at Naimisharanya, where the concourse of sages sat, listening to Sutta. "All glories to Lord Kapila," they shouted. "All glories to Devahuti, and all glories to Shukadev and Parikshit," said Sutta. Darkness had fallen. Sutta suggested they adjourn and resume in the morning. The assembly respectfully rose as Sutta retired for the night. Then they too dispersed, animatedly discussing what they had heard that day. This brings us to the end of Canto 3 from A Retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam, Brilliant as the Sun, 2 Avatars, which is the part 2, and we will begin Canto 4 next time. Thank you for joining. Wish you all a happy day ahead. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.